Aurora, Colorado.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Study is Key. That is, welcome back if you've been here before. If you've not been here before, welcome to the channel. Hopefully you'll stick around to the end of the video and then subscribe to the channel so you can stick around for future videos as well. So in today's video, as you guys can see on the screen, we're going to be responding to none other than Jimmy Akin. Jimmy Akin. I'm so sorry. Jimmy Akin from Catholic Answer. Oh, man, that got me. All right, no more laughing. I got myself good with that one. I'll be honest. I tickled my own funny bone there. So, like I said, we're going to be responding to Jimmy Akin in this video today, where he addresses a caller's concern or question having to do with Matthew 10:28, which is a proof text to which annihilationists, as myself, often appeal. And I don't think Jimmy Akin does a very good job of addressing this text whatsoever. And so in this video today, I'm going to be responding to the reasons that Jimmy Akin offers for not taking this verse to be support for annihilationism. And should be a good time. Shouldn't be too long of a video, I don't think. We'll see. Whenever you guys click on the video, you'll know how long it is. Anyways, I guess without further ado, let's just jump straight into listening to what Jimmy Akin has to say, and I'll pause and comment along the way.
And 10:60 a.m. is the place and the call sign of Anonymous. Hello, Anonymous. You're up next.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question on Matthew 10:28.
Right.
Someone I know claims that verse shows that bad souls are annihilated at death.
Sure. So the question is...
I tried to explain the soul is spirit, so it cannot be destroyed, but I'd like some explanation of that particular verse where it says, beware the one that can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna.
Right. So if the claim were true, that this verse indicated that the soul can be destroyed in such a way that it no longer exists, well, that would actually make the verse a little less scary, wouldn't it? Because the worst fate that would befall you if you didn't live the way you should would be, oh, you're not going to exist anymore. And that's not particularly, that's not scary in the way the thought of eternal damnation is. In fact...
All right, so first pause. Now, my own view, personally, I guess it depends on the day, to be honest, but most of the time, I'll agree with Jimmy Akin that eternal torment does sound much scarier than annihilation. But like I said, that sort of depends on the day for me. But yes, I do more often fall in line with Jimmy's own sense there. But it is worth noting that what is the scariest is not the same for everybody. So according to Plutarch, a 1st century eclectic philosopher, in his writing called Non Posse or something like that, I'll put it on screen. In section 26, we read, quote, as to the vulgar sort, besides their fear of what is in hell, and by the way, vulgar here is referring just to the common folk. So as to the common folk, besides their fear of what is in hell, the hope they have conceived of an eternity from the tales and fictions of the ancients, and their great desire of being, which is both the earliest and the strongest of all, exceed in pleasure and sweet content of mind that childish dread. And therefore, when they lose their children, wives, or friends, they would rather have them be somewhere and still remain, though in misery, than that they should be quite destroyed, dissolved, and reduced to nothing. And they are pleased when they hear it said of a dying person that he goes away or departs, and such other words as intimate death to be the soul's remove and not destruction. And they sometimes speak thus, but I'll even there think on my dearest friend. But now all men shrink from that face of death which carries with it insensibility, oblivion, and extinction of knowledge, as being dismal, grim, and dark. And they are discomposed when they hear it said of anyone, he is perished, or he is gone, or he is no more. So this is from the 1st century. This was apparently the way, at least a lot of common folk thought in the first century. They thought of annihilation as scarier than departing this world and going into the next in misery. They preferred the idea of their friends or wives or children going into misery than just being no more. And in fact, they preferred that for themselves because they would say to themselves, but even there, even in that state of misery, I'll think on my dearest friend. So the idea that annihilation isn't as scary as eternal torment is actually not true for everyone. Maybe it is true for the majority today, but maybe it wasn't even true for the majority back then. Honestly, it doesn't matter what's scariest. It frankly doesn't. What matters is what Jesus and the apostles taught. But I just wanted to say, because I do think it's interesting, that actually not everybody thinks that eternal torment is scarier than annihilation. So I guess with that out of the way, we can keep going.
In fact, that's one of the principal motives, because eternal damnation is itself a scary concept. That's something that motivates people to seek out these alternative theories.
I'm going to stop it there again. So while it's true that some seek out a different view of hell because they can't countenance or stomach the eternal torment view, it wasn't true for me, and it also wasn't true for a number of other people. Many of us simply found this view to be inconsistent with various biblical teachings like the one Jesus offers in Matthew 10:28, and we began studying the issue more deeply from there. But just for the sake of argument, if it were true that every one of us sought out a different view because we couldn't countenance or stomach the eternal torment view, it wouldn't do anything to undermine the legitimacy of the reasons we have to adopt and maintain the annihilation view.
When we have this language of destruction in this context, where it's the comparison is being made to Gehenna, which was a location in the vicinity of Jerusalem where children were sacrificed by making them pass through fire to pagan gods, and thus it acquired a very evil reputation.
Now, advocates of the eternal torment view often want to have their cake and eat it too. Remember what Jimmy said earlier, namely that if Matthew 10:28 indicated that the soul is destroyed in such a way that it no longer exists, then the worst fate that would befall you would be, oh, you're not going to exist anymore, as if it were nothing to bat an eye about. But now, when it comes to the children being killed by fire in the Valley of Hinnom, he rightly wants to suggest that it's a horrible experience to put the children through. Jimmy, we annihilationists believe that being annihilated is the result of a violent, traumatic, painful death, of the sort that the children would suffer. In the words of 2 Peter 2:6, by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. To say that the worst fate that would befall you is, oh, you're not going to exist anymore, is just as absurd as saying to one of the children before sacrificing them, the worst fate that will befall you is, oh, you won't be alive on earth anymore. I mean, don't you think that's leaving out part of the process? I mean, would you undermine the death Christ suffered by looking only to what followed it? I don't think you would. It's akin to the people who say, oh, well, all Jesus suffered ultimately was, a bad weekend. I mean, that's nonsense. So let's just keep going.
And some have said that in the time of Jesus, it was like a burning garbage dump.
Well, actually, quick parenthetical statement here. There's actually no evidence for this claim prior to the 1200s when a rabbi named David Kimhi claimed this in a commentary. Anyways, that's not super important, but just wanted to say that.
In any event, it conveys the idea of a state of ruination, of a really bad and horrible place.
But it's more than that. Let's let Jeremiah 7, verses 31 to 33 tell us the image that Jesus was evoking in the minds of his listeners by mentioning Gehenna, which is the Greek transliteration of the Hebrew truncation of the phrase Valley of the Son of Hinnom. So having made our way to Jeremiah 7, we read in verse 31, or starting at verse 31, quote, "And they have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the Valley of the Son of Hinnom." Valley of the Son of Hinnom is what would have come to the minds of the hearers that Jesus was speaking to when he said Gehenna, because Valley of the Son of Hinnom, truncated in Hebrew, is Gehinnom. And it goes on to say, "To burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, nor did it come into my mind. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no more be called Topheth, or the Valley of the Son of Hinnom, but the Valley of Slaughter. For they will bury in Topheth because there is no room elsewhere. And the dead bodies of this people will be food for the birds of the air and for the beasts of the earth, and none will frighten them away. So the picture that would have been evoked in the minds of Jesus' listeners when he was speaking the words that he spoke in Matthew 10:28 was a picture of death, a picture of a valley being called the Valley of Slaughter, and a valley in which there were dead bodies being devoured by birds and beasts, and none can frighten them away, so none can, give these people a proper burial. So the point is, the picture that would have been evoked in the minds of these listeners in the first century would have been a picture of death, a picture of grim death, slaughter and death, not eternal torment. So mentioning that the underlying Greek word here is Gehenna does absolutely nothing to help Jimmy Akin, but it only helps me and my position, right? It's our position that contends that what will happen in Gehenna is death, right? They will be killed, body and soul. Simple as that.
And that's what's meant when we read about souls being destroyed in this sense, not in the sense of they cease to exist, but they're in a ruinous condition. It's a mode of language like if you have somebody and they've invested all of their money in a particular project, and then that project goes belly up, they can say, I've been destroyed. Well, they don't mean I cease to exist. They mean I've been ruined. And that's the kind of destruction we're talking about here. It's ruination, not annihilation.
So the fact is, there is no reason whatsoever to take the word destroy to mean what Jimmy says it means. And let me just read you part of an article I've written on Matthew 10:28 and 4th Maccabees to give you some reasons why. And by the way, let me just say, even if that were, a possible meaning of the word destroy, possible does not mean plausible. Possible does not mean contextually the best understanding. So let me give you those reasons in the article I've written. Let's go to it right now. So here's the article I've written. It's on the Rethinking Hell website. It's called 4th Maccabees 13 verses 14 to 15, Understanding Matthew 10:28 and Eternal Torment. So in this section here called A Quick Examination of Matthew 10:28, I say, as an annihilationist, whenever I'm asked which verse most clearly teaches my view, my lips almost reflexively at this point immediately begin to recite Matthew 10:28. And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Depending on the type of interlocutor, my recitation elicits different types of responses, but regardless of which type, that's not what I wanted it to do. But regardless of which type I'm speaking to, everyone at least admits that on the surface, Matthew 10:28 sounds like it teaches my view. That said, it really doesn't matter how far beneath the surface one wants to dig. The exegetical shovel does nothing but uncover golden reasons to take the verse the way it sounds on the surface. Firstly, in the rest of Matthew and the other synoptic gospels, whenever the word translated destroy, apollumi, is used in the active voice, that's annoying, used in the active voice as a transitive verb describing an action done to a personal agent, like in Matthew 10:28, the word always means slay. In other words, it means kill, but in a more emphatic way. Secondly, the word translated kill in Matthew 10:28 is apokteno, and when we look to the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, we see that whenever apokteno and apollumi are used in proximity and share the aforementioned semantic features, apollumi invariably means slay. For example, you have Genesis 18:24-25 in the Septuagint, Esther 9:15-16 in the Septuagint, Daniel 2:24 in the Septuagint. You have a bunch of other examples of this. Thirdly, whereas Mark 3:4 records Jesus asking, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill, Luke 6:9 records him saying, I ask you, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to destroy, apollumi, it. So evidently what Jesus meant was communicable with either word. Now, at this juncture, though some still try to argue for a different meaning of the word by appealing to other, less than pertinent uses of apollumy, some concede the meaning and instead make a beeline for the fact that the verse merely says that God can slay both soul and body, not that God will do so. Though I could say more in response to this point, it suffices to point out that in Matthew 10:39, Jesus goes on to say that whoever finds his psyche will apollumy it. For those unaware, the word translated soul in Matthew 10:28 is also psyche. So what Jesus said God can do to the psyche, we explicitly know he will do to it. Once this is pointed out, the move is often to sidestep Matthew 10:28 altogether and try to prove me wrong by showing some other verse in the Bible teaches eternal torment. The reasoning goes something like, quote, I can't explain Matthew 10:28, but this other verse teaches eternal torment, and since Scripture cannot contradict Scripture, your reading of Matthew 10:28 can't be right, end quote. But of course, the sword cuts both ways. So even if they could somehow show that another verse taught eternal torment, I could simply employ the same reasoning, and we'd be at an impasse. However, I wouldn't need to employ such reasoning because to be deep in exegesis is to cease to be a traditionalist. No traditionalist proof text in Scripture can withstand conditionalist scrutiny. So, sorry, Jimmy, I mean, you just cannot give an English example of how the word destroy might be used and just sort of read that into Matthew 10:28 as though it's a viable option. It's not. Contextually, linguistically, there are only good reasons to take the verse the way we take it, that God will in fact slay both body and soul in Gehenna, and that will result in people being annihilated. There will be no more part of the person, of the human being that is alive. So they will be dead, non-existent forever. All right, back to you, Jimmy.
And we have confirmation of this from other passages. Another famous one in the Gospels is found in Luke, where in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, the rich man is in torment. He's obviously conscious. He hasn't ceased to exist. And he's an example of a suffering soul because of what he did and because of what he failed to do.
What the rich man experiences in the story, whether you take it literally or not, is explicitly said to take place in Hades, not Gehenna. Hades is the intermediate state between death and resurrection, so it has no bearing whatsoever on the issue of what the punishment will be at the resurrection on the last day. A person can be tormented in Hades and then slain in Gehenna, resulting in their annihilation. So this is really weak from Jimmy, and I honestly expect better from an apologist.
If you look in the book of Revelation, you have those who worship the beast and who take its image experiencing torment forever on an ongoing basis. It talks about how the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. And
okay, so, I mean, first of all, he misrepresents the passage, but it's understandable how he could come out of reading it, understanding it that way. So I've actually written a lengthy 3-part article in response to Trent Horn on the issue of annihilationism. And in the 3rd part of the article, I address this text at length. So let me just read part of it to you now, the part that pertains to the part of the verse that Jimmy emphasized, namely the smoke going up forever and ever. And I'll link the article in the description so that you can read the rest of my treatment of that verse that deals with the other part of it. And if you choose, you could also read to the end of the article where I also address Revelation 20 verses 10 to 15, which is often brought up by advocates of the eternal torment view. But anyways, let's go to the article and I'll read the relevant part for now. So the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. Turning our attention now to Revelation 14:11, Trent says that Revelation's account speaks of, quote, those condemned to hell, in which the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. To demonstrate how this verse better supports annihilationism, let's set our crosshairs on finding out what it means that the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. Jumping ahead to Revelation 19:3, smoke is also said to rise from Babylon forever and ever. But that is not all that is said about Babylon. Smoke rising from her forever and ever is the outcome of what is said to have happened to her in the last chapter. In Revelation 18, we read that she will be burned down, that in a single hour she has been laid waste, and that, interpreting the seed for John, quote, a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more." So far from being support for the traditional view, smoke rising is actually an idiom referring to complete destruction. Indeed, Genesis 19:28 notes that, quote, "the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace after the Lord utterly wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah with fire and sulfur," the same two elements mentioned in Revelation 14:10. Now, one may try to say, yeah, both passages speak of smoke rising and of being afflicted with fire and sulfur, but in Revelation, unlike in Genesis, the smoke rises forever and ever, and it's specifically the smoke of their torment, not of their destruction. Now, to be blunt, this argument has no teeth. Torment and destruction are not mutually exclusive. The process of being destroyed by fire is undoubtedly to experience a great deal of torment. In Revelation 18, verses 7 to 9, speaking of Babylon, we read, quote, "As much as she glorified herself and lived in luxury, give her a measure of torment and mourning. She will be burned down with fire. The kings of the earth will weep when they see the smoke of her burning." You see, Revelation's account itself makes it clear that torment and destruction go hand in hand, speaking of smoke as the result of fiery destructive torment, namely fiery destructive torment that leads to Babylon being no more. Now, concerning the forever and ever part, it is simply meant to intensify the idiom. It symbolizes destruction from which that which was destroyed will never return. To be sure, consider Isaiah 34, verses 9 to 10, a text that refers to the destruction of Edom. Quote, "And the streams of Edom shall be turned into pitch, and her soil into sulfur. Her land shall become burning pitch. Night and day it shall not be quenched. Its smoke shall go up forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. None shall pass through it forever and ever." Need I point out the obvious? Edom is not still burning, nor is there literally smoke still rising from it. So again, to be clear, smoke rising forever is not evidence of fire burning something forever. It's an idiom communicating complete destruction. And like I said, if you're interested in knowing how I address the part of the verse that says they have no rest day or night, I encourage you very strongly to come read this article. I think you will be rather surprised at just how confident we can be that this also doesn't support eternal torment. As you can see, it's a rather lengthy section, even an anticipated objection, and then we get into Revelation 20. So again, go read it. I encourage you to do so. Don't just assume that we annihilationists have no good answer to this. We do. So that is there for you if you desire to learn something about our view. Now, let's go back to Jimmy Akin and listen to what he has to say to conclude this video.
And so you have real indicators in Scripture as well as in other places in apostolic tradition that it is possible for people to turn their back on God and say, "I don't want any part of you," in a way that God will honor. And those individuals who do that experience a form of spiritual destruction or ruination, but it doesn't entail the destruction of annihilation.
All righty, thanks.
Sure.
All right. Thanks for that, Anonymous.
All right, so he mentions apostolic here in passing, so let me just also make a comment in passing. When it comes to getting acquainted with apostolic tradition, there is no better source to turn to than the infallible scriptures written by the apostles themselves. But if you place any stock in the writings of the earliest church fathers like I do, then I would encourage you to read part 1 of my series of articles responding to Trent Horn, where I argue that Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, and Irenaeus of Lyon were all quite clearly annihilationists. So I'll link that article in the description for those interested, and also there's another short section on Ignatius in part 2 of that article. And by the way, that's just a small sampling of early church fathers and documents that we can cite in support of annihilationism in the first 2 centuries. So anyways, I hope you guys learned something and found the video helpful. Feel free to ask me anything in the comments and I'll try to get back to you. See you guys in a bit, and remember that study is key.